visit beforeitstooLateMD.org or call 211 and press 1.
State Circle is made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities and is made possible by the generous support of our members. Thank you.
Connecting Marylanders to their government. This is State Circle.
Good evening. Welcome to State Circle. We begin this week with a very tough test question for local school officials. They can A, reopen classrooms and risk spreading the coronavirus, or B, continue with virtual education, though that may not be effective for many students. We spoke with Teachers Union President Cheryl Bost.
We sent a letter to the State Superintendent Salmon and Governor Hogan, collectively from the Maryland State Education Association, representing 75,000 educators across the state, the Maryland PTA, and the Baltimore Teachers Union, who represents educators in Baltimore City. And after all of the conversation about the number of cases that we have here in Maryland, looking to see what's happening across the country, and understanding that we have limited resources because of no additional funds from the federal government and cuts still on the plate from Governor Hogan, we came to the conclusion that we should start schools in a virtual setting. But the key to this is start it with the first semester, but get it right. Let's make sure that we increase the rigor in what we're doing. Let's make sure we address the inequities where some students didn't have access to computers or technology. Same with our educators. Let's provide additional training for all of our educators. So let's focus on getting virtual learning right before we can then move into a hybrid model, which would also include virtual learning. And what happens if we get further into the school year and we would need to close schools again based on cases? We don't want to go into the crisis learning that we were in the spring. We want to do a lot better for our students.
Also with us on this call is Michelle Grossman, who is president of the Westland Middle School PTSA in Montgomery County. And she, along with 16 other PTA presidents, sent a letter to the county school board there. Michelle, what was the purpose of that letter?
The gist of that letter was to explain that we wanted live teaching for the students. Cheryl and I agree on a lot. Teachers are really important. Having teachers lead those classes, having kids have a schedule where they wake up in the morning and have somewhere to report to and have somewhere to be throughout the day is key to getting them engaged and honestly to their mental health and to them seeing other students. So our letter expressed that we wanted to see live teaching in at least the core subjects 5 days a week.
Are you saying live in person?
Live does not need to be in person. Live can be virtually live. But what happened in the spring was many of the teachers were pushing out content and then they were having office hours where kids could check in. But, you know, as the mother of a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, they're just not really capable of that. They're not really capable of reaching out to teachers. There's a shyness factor there. They don't have the executive functioning skills to pull off the independent study element of this. Checking in once a week with a teacher simply isn't enough. Teachers are important, and they need to be meeting live with their teachers.
Cheryl, on a practical standpoint, how does the union feel about the workload, the technology? How did it go in the spring, and how can we make it better for the fall semester?
Well, I think it is important to talk about March 13th. Everything kind of came to a halt. And we thought we would be home for 2 weeks, both parents and educators. So educators didn't take all their materials home. Many didn't take their laptops if they even had them home. Some students were in that place. And then we realized this was going to be a longer period of time. And educators hadn't been trained on a lot of the platforms. Some school systems didn't want teachers to have direct instruction with their students. So those directives all came from the central offices about how much in-person virtual learning could take place. When I say that synchronous, like we were actually talking to each other like we are now, how much of it was going to be packets or recorded lessons. Our educators, we did polling of educators and parents, And both were concerned at the lack of motivation, the lack of participation of students. And so we both agree that we have to get this better for the fall, but that's going to take focus and funding to do that. But educators do want to be connected to their students. We love to teach. We want to be in person, but we just don't have the safety of our schools taken care of right now. We don't have a way to social distance, a way to provide everybody with masks. The ventilation systems haven't been certified. So we have to get virtual learning right. We agree it needs to be more rigorous. It needs to be more in person with all age students so that they can be engaged and participating and feel like they have connection to their educators and their friends that are in classes.
You know, this is maybe the slow motion, somewhat hidden part of the coronavirus disaster. I mean, it's been obviously a medical disaster. It's been an economic disaster. Those things are easily seen, but the educational disaster, you think about the backsliding that happens. You have a term for it where students forget all their algebra over the course of the summer. They may not see a classroom for a year or more. What's the impact going to be?
Well, we agree that it's detrimental, but and I know that Michelle wants to chime in here as a parent too. But we have to remember that this is also a social emotional impact on our students, self-isolation, and our educators. We're isolated. We're not talking to many people, especially if you live by yourself. Kids need to learn through social interaction. They learn from their peers as much as they often learn from their educators and their parents. So we're going to see big impacts on social emotional trauma on our students, as well as a long-lasting academic impact through this coronavirus. But we have to understand, we haven't seen the country or the state treat education as the crisis that it really is. We haven't seen the airplane behind Governor Hogan with all the supplies that education needs like we did with the healthcare workers. It was the right thing to do for healthcare workers. Now we need to do it for our education system.
Right.
Michelle?
It's incredibly important that we get this right. You were talking about the loss of knowledge over the summer and what this would mean for losing a whole year. I think that if we get this right, we can really mitigate the damage. Mm-hmm. But we have to really approach this as these kids need to learn what they are supposed to learn in a year, and then we need to back it up and figure out what we need to do that. Math in particular, the pedagogy behind it is you need to learn something and then you need to practice it, and there needs to be repeat exposure. I'm very concerned with the plan that Montgomery County Public Schools put out. It has kids attending each class twice a week. It's simply not enough for that kind of repeated exposure and the retention that we're looking for in the kids. So when our letter called for live classes in each of the cores, I really mean live classes in each of the cores 5 days a week. I don't understand this Wednesday asynchronous learning day. That seems strange to me. I don't understand why we're only doing 4 classes a day. I really think, if these kids are going to get where they need to get, and we have deemed that this is the appropriate amount of content for them to get in a 5-day week over the course of a year, we're not going to get there if we're having that.
If you were on the school board, what would you want done?
Ooh. Cheryl, you want to take that one?
I was going to say, first, they have to listen to our educators and our parents and make them part of the stakeholder team. We have to start out virtually and get it right. To what Michelle was saying, I agree we need to be more rigorous. We need to do better than we did in the spring, but we also have to balance screen time, sitting, and workload. And so that's going to take some time to plan out, and that's why we want districts to take this time before school starts to get that right, and then be flexible enough to readjust as we start moving forward. But really, voices have to be in the room of educators and parents. And then I want school boards to ask the county government, the state government, and the federal government for the true funding that they need to educate our students.
But Cheryl, where would it go? I mean, we've seen boatloads of Chromebooks being handed out. Teachers are still on the payroll. There have been steps taken, maybe not enough, to make sure that the gap between the haves and the have-nots in terms of broadband access has been addressed. Where else do you want to spend money right now?
So first of all, our schools in Maryland, has been proven through studies, are inadequately funded overall. We fund affluent schools at a higher rate than we do in our areas of concentrated poverty. So we have to deal with those inequities. Many school systems do not have a one-to-one ratio for students to devices, and many of them don't give educators the devices to take home so that they can even teach. I have teachers in Dorchester County who are sitting in the parking lot of the school trying to do their lessons while their own children are trying to learn. So we have connectivity issues. So all of this is going to take some additional funding. And as Michelle said, if we're going to get to the core every day, that might not be the same teacher doing that math each day. We may have to get more teachers involved, more of our parent educators, so that we can address more of the academic needs of our students, even virtually.
And State Circle continues right after this.
Can you tell us what you know?
Turning back now to the race for the White House.
The State Board of Elections voted Thursday to set up a new election.
It must be a very emotional day.
The world changed in the blink of an eye.
Children are at the heart of this story.
Coming up Monday evening at 7 on MPT, we will present a special program, A Conversation, Race and Policing. We'll hear from leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement along with police officials. Tonight, The View from the Pulpit. Joining us now, Reverend Derek DeWitt of First Mount Calvary Baptist Church in Baltimore and Pastor Larry Walker of Celebration Church in Columbia. Thank you for being with us. Nice to see both of you again. We really just want to hear what you're thinking. Your congregants look to you for guidance, for leadership. What are you telling them about this summer of 2020?
Well, this summer of 2020 has been, as we all know, very unique to not just Marylanders and Americans, but around the world. The onset of the coronavirus that got everybody on lockdown. I think the beauty of it, if there is anything that a silver lining, is that it shut down everything and it made people pay attention to the news. And as we were looking for news on the coronavirus, we also began to see in the news the grave injustice that I'm sure Pastor DeWitt would, or Dr. DeWitt would agree, we've been seeing all our lives as African-American men in America. And it has shined the spotlight on very bright on all of America to see the injustice. And so we continue to tell our congregations that while this is not something that we are surprised about, we are very prayerful that this would be a time when our brothers and sisters in America who are God-loving, Christ-fearing people would look to what they see with their eyes and not try to shake it off as if it's not the reality of what we live every day in America.
Interesting. Dr. DeWitt?
Yes, and you know, these are extraordinary and some would say unprecedented times, at least in our lifetime, what we're seeing. And a lot of our congregants are having difficult times dealing with the overwhelming bad news, if you will, that comes out every day as it relates to coronavirus, social injustice. And so we have to do a good job as clergy to encourage them and remind them that, if God bring you to it, then he can bring you through it. You have to remain faithful. And at the same time, we have to remain diligent in fighting and combating the ills which we see in our society. And quite sadly, we've gotten used to having to deal with such matters, throughout our history. And we would just remind them that this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. We have to stay vigilant, we have to stay courageous, and we have to continue to just exercise our faith.
Your community is as familiar with this as any, right? I mean, you're in Sandtown, Winchester. You're a few blocks below North Avenue. I mean, this was the community where Freddie Gray lived, was arrested, where the disturbances broke out. So, I mean, this isn't all new. What's your perspective on whether there's been any improvement over the last 5 years?
Well, in the last 5.5 years, I've gotten in a lot of trouble by saying the only thing that's really happened in Sandtown is the police station, which was responsible for the arrest of Freddie Gray. They got a remodeled police station as a result of the civil unrest. We still, Sandtown, 74 square blocks, we still have 109 liquor stores and no grocery store. And subsequently, our church is having to feed and our partner churches are having to feed people 7 days a week within the community. And now you throw in this perfect storm of COVID-19, civil unrest, the climate of no leadership that we have in Washington. And then we have the release of returning citizens, massive amounts of people who got released from jail. And a lot of those people settle in Sandtown. You add to the fact that they've closed the rec centers, the kids have been on lockdown, there's no summer jobs. So now you have this massive recruiting effort by criminals to recruit our young people, which has, it led to this influx in violent crime in the city. So you add all of that together, we have just such tremendous, tremendous work to do as a faith-based organizations.
Pastor Walker, your faith-based organization is in a different spot. You're out in the suburbs. How's it the same? How's it different?
Well, it's the same in that there are pockets of poverty in Howard County, believe it or not. And there has been this, I've been here since 1973. There has been this long stereotype that Howard County is perfect and all the rich people live in Howard County, and yet there are high density populations of people who are living below the poverty line and people who are struggling every day. The challenge to Howard County is while people come here and they need people here to provide services, and yet they can't afford to live here. So people oftentimes have 2 and 3 jobs just to be able to rent a place to live for their children. They come here seeking opportunities for their children in what is, quote, the better school system. And yet we find ourselves struggling to talk about how we provide equitable education for all children. And so Howard County has a very affluent population, but it also has a population that that needs to be served. We also partner with the Maryland Food Bank and provide food for members of our community, and we work in a number of ways. We have a very strong benevolence program where we're just helping people to keep their lights on and keep their rents paid. And so there is, this has been an issue in Howard County for years. It's just not one that is often brought to light in the news and in the press. It doesn't mean that Howard County is bad by any means. It just means that Howard County is no different than any other community in America.
What has to happen to improve relations between the Black community and law enforcement? How do you take this moment and capitalize on it? Isn't the right word, but there's an opportunity. In George Floyd's death, a lot of eyes have been opened. The debate has changed. What needs to happen going forward?
Well, Jeff, I'd like to jump in and take that and say, to start, we have to look at the very foundation of a law enforcement organization, a law enforcement society, founded as slave catchers. People who were being enslaved and choosing to be free, running for their lives for freedom, and then having a group of men deputized to go find them anywhere in America and bring them back to their quote owners. And that's where we see the beginning of this law enforcement society. Even in Reconstruction, we see men in communities being deputized or deputizing themselves to find these newly freed people who were choosing not to continue on the plantations and seeking employment, and yet they would be captured for the most menial offense, convicted almost on the spot, and then put into prison and given back to or sold back to landowners to provide labor. And so the law enforcement community comes out of denigrating African Americans and capturing them. And so when we fast forward to today, it's going to take the law enforcement community to recognize the very roots of their existence and choosing to change. I think it's going to take peer pressure. I think it's going to take good law enforcement officers. My sister is a retired law enforcement officer. My cousin is a retired state trooper. I have lots of family members. I have two cousins that were the very first Black police officers in the city of Pittsburgh. So I have a lot of family members who have served in law enforcement, and yet it's going to take peer pressure. When we look at what happened to George Floyd, it wasn't just the officer who had his knee on George Floyd's neck. It was his counterparts who stood by, and none of them tapped him out and said, hey, I'll take over from here. And it's going to take that kind of pressure throughout our police forces around America. I contend that the vast majority of police officers are good people. But just like in the very founding of America, where a third of the people who founded America believed that people from the sub-Saharan desert in Africa were not human, we still have a third of the population that would not see us as full citizens, as full people, as human. And that third also exists in our police departments and in every aspect of American life. That's what
let me get Dr. DeWitt in on this.
Yeah, I think I echo what Dr. Walker is saying. And having said what I said about the Western District Police Station getting a remodel after Freddie Gray, I don't hold the officers accountable for that. We have a very good working relationship with the officers of the Western District. In fact, just yesterday at our soup kitchen, the officers from Western District was there to help serve the community. So, but I do want to say that in order for change to take place, there's going to have to be a very serious conversation with law enforcement about the biases that we face in the African American community. If they're not willing to recognize that there's a different style of policing when it comes to minority communities, then we'll never get anywhere with changing it. And I think that what we are seeing now with the George Floyd death is we're seeing that the covers are being pulled off of what has been normal practices for years as it relates to policing in minority communities. Bad cops, not all police officers are bad, but the bad cops end up in minority communities because there's certain communities that would not have them. Police chiefs and commissioners would not assign them to more affluent communities. So we end up with them, and this is the way that they police. It's different across America for communities of color.
Join us Monday at 7 for a conversation, race and policing. Now, MPT's Charles Robinson reports there's been a history-making change in leadership at a Baltimore business group.
How does it feel? It's amazing. It is at a time, though, that we have a pandemic on top of a pandemic. So it's one of those things that I feel my life's experiences culminated to make me the best person for right now. And so while there is the excitement, there's also the anxiousness of, how we make sure we keep downtown vibrant during this time.
The Downtown Partnership is a business collective. Stokes has used her vast resources to assist businesses in securing grants and leveraging state and federal dollars. One project that makes her excited is the new Lexington Market.
As Lexington Market transforms, because that's a part of what's happening now, we look forward to that spawning amazing development, giving the community the type of infrastructure they deserve in there. And so when you see the plans for what it looks to be, it's going to be an inclusive place, but it's going to be a place that really says, this is our Baltimore.
Much of the excitement is on hold. Demonstrators disrupted downtown with protests breaking window panes. As plywood went up on windows, her staff began to paint words of encouragement to change the narrative.
Shalonda Stokes was kind of surprised to find out there were actual businesses in downtown Baltimore that wanted to promote Black Lives Matter.
So what you saw throughout this process as we're boarding is you saw people who really wanted to support any way they could. People were, honking horns and offering us food and drinks as we were painting the buildings. And then to have that property owner say, you know what, I'm all in to support with just another level of we're doing the right thing and we know together we're stronger.
The partnership employees can be seen on street corners assisting residents and visitors. In Baltimore, I'm Charles Robinson for State Circle.
Charles, thank you. That is our program for this week. Remember to join us Monday for a special program, A Conversation, Race and Policing. That's Monday at 7 on MPT. Please follow us on Twitter at MPT News, and you can see videos of our recent programs online at video.mpt.tv. Now, for all of us at MPT, thanks for watching and have a good night.
This program was made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities.
Join the American legends of rock, pop, Motown, and doo-wop for a celebration of America's greatest songs. 40 great vocal groups and legends join PBS in an American celebration of freedom. Saturday night at 7:30 on MPT.
You're watching MPT. Be informed, be entertained, be inspired.
Here to give us